let's do this. Finally, 9:36, and we are going. All right, so before we start critical thinking exercise 10, we're going to do a similar approach to it as we did last week, whereas we'll talk about the actual process and how to create a parametric family, and then we will spend a little time actually creating it. So if you go over to critical thinking exercise 10 and you click on this little link here that says LAC table, all right, you click on LAC. It's literally the most simple table. Oh my gosh, the price went up. The price was $8 when we were over there in the other class. Change the color?
Yeah, change the color.
Wow, I was going to say, $8, deal all day long. 10, no way.
White one costs.
But
only the yellow one's $10.
yeah, it's very trendy right now. But white's the sale price of $8. Okay. Anyways, running on to tangent. So we're going to work on creating families today that are parametric. And what we mean by that, as a little refresher from last class, is we want to be able to, when we create a family, in certain instances, we won't always make them parametric. It is actually a very difficult process. It's probably the most difficult thing we'll learn the entire semester. It's not even a topic that was even a part of the curriculum before I started teaching. But I like to at least introduce the basics of creating a parametric family. This table is by far the easiest when it comes to creating a parametric family. It's very simple, but it will get across the concepts of creating that parametric family. But our goal is that when we create this table, we want to be able to bring it into our project and it be able to have certain parametric functions, meaning that if you want the table to be 4 foot by 4 foot, you can just type in the dimensions and it becomes 4 foot by 4 foot. You don't have to create a new table for every size that you want, okay? Like last class we created a table, but it's basically a one size fits all. That's the size that it is. You can bring it into your project. If you want a different size, you're going to go in and basically recreate the table according to the size that you want. So our goal by the end of today is to be able to, add some parametric functionality to our table so that you could change various dimensions or materials inside the project versus inside the family creator. Okay, so I chose this LAC table because of its simplicity. It's funny that it has I always go on tangents on this table. I just love the fact that we're being able to create a table for $8. It has 4.6 stars out of 5. So, but let's dive into this. All right. So here we have our LAC table, and our goal is so that we can make it whatever size we want, whether it be a dining room table, whether it be an end table, what have you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and turn on Revit. All right. If everyone has this. All right. And we're going to go over to new. All right. Actually, no, we're not going to go to new. We're going to go down to families, and then we're going to click on new. All right. And last class we talked about some of the differences between all of the different Revit family templates. Okay, everyone should have a good understanding of what that is. Today we are going to work off of the furniture template. All right, furniture template is basically it's very similar to the generic model floor based, but it's going to have a furniture tag to it. Okay, so that it actually has tagging functionality should you want to do that. So we're going to click on furniture, all right, because we're creating a piece of furniture here, and we are going to click on open. Okay, and by the way, the recording for this is already up from last semester on there. So as soon as we are finished, you can technically look at last semester's recording prior to this one actually becoming available. So here, you're probably familiar with this. We started with this last class, all right? This is going to be our family editor, okay? We're going to create a family using our different tools, using our extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep, and different void forms that we talked about last class, okay? So we're not going to cover that too much today, but instead we're going to actually focus on, on understanding the functionality of a parametric family, okay, and how to create that. So the first step actually, before we start creating them, let's talk about the ones that we're going to create. So we have this table here, All right, we have this lack table, and my goal by the end of this is to be able to adjust the width of the table, the length of the table, the height of the table, and actually the width of the legs of the table. Okay, so and the material. Okay, so we're going to create 5 parametric functions for this table: length, width, height, table leg, width, and materials. Okay, so we're going to focus on those 5 parameters. Okay, so the first step to creating this parametric functionality is to start to establish our various constraints and the various different reference planes that are going to be associated with this parametric table. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, and what's tricky and what I want you to focus mostly on during this process is actually focusing on, I guess, the process and how I get from A to B. It's a very step-by-step, or it's a very step-oriented process. If you kind of diverge away from this process or you do it a little bit differently, it doesn't work. That's why I kind of say it's probably one of the trickiest things that we'll do today, because it's a very process-driven assignment. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to Create, and we're going to go over and we're going to click on RP, which is reference plane. Okay, it's going to be this button right here. Yours might look a little bit differently depending on the horizontal ribbon that you have, but we want to create a new reference plane. And we're going to create reference planes that are going to represent the outermost boundaries of the different components that we're going to create. Okay, so first we're going to create the reference planes for our tabletop. Okay, so we're going to create the reference planes for just the top portion of this table, and then we'll go on creating the reference planes that are associated with our legs, and then also for the height. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to go over and click on reference plane, all right? And I am going to draw a reference plane, we'll say at 2 feet on both sides of the 2 reference planes that are already given to us. Okay, so by default, as a part of this family template, we have 2 reference planes that are given to us. And the center of these 2 reference planes is going to basically be our insertion point into our project. So our goal is that as we create these different reference planes, is they're all equal to our center datum of these 2. Okay, if we create it off over here, or we create it off down over here, it's not going to insert itself where your cursor is in the actual project. So we're going to work off of that central datum. All right, so I'm going to create a couple reference planes. I'm going to say 2 feet, and this actual dimension doesn't really matter whether it's 2 feet, 2'6". It is not critical at this particular time. I'm just going to go ahead and create it 2 feet off of our vertical reference plane that we already have. Okay, so here we have those 2. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing off of our horizontal reference plane. Okay, so boom here, like so. Okay, and we're going to do 2 feet over here. So we're going to have a series of reference planes that looks like this. And again, the first step is going to be to set up all of the reference planes, and we're also going to set up all of our parametric functions prior to actually adding the physical objects to the model. Okay, so we're going to do quite a few steps even before we actually create an actual object. Okay, and the first step is making sure that the parametric functionality of this object actually works. Okay, so we have these different reference planes right here. We've added 4. Okay, and then I'm going to go over all of these. This one right here, this one right here, this one right here, and this one right here are all going to be representational of the outermost boundary of our tabletop. All right, so from here I'm going to go up to Create. Again, we're going to start to add a couple of our very basic parametric controls. Okay, so sorry, this upper ribbon is a little bit different than the one at my office. Let me just kind of refresh my memory here. Let's see. Oh, I know why here. Okay, so we're going to go over to Annotate, all right, and we're going to click on the Aligned Dimension tool. Okay, so I'm going to click on the Aligned Dimension tool, and I'm going to add a dimension from here to here. Okay, that 4 foot is going to end up representing our width, and I'm going to add a dimension from here to here, all right, and that's going to represent our length of our table. So right now, all we have is just a basic dimension. Okay, what we need to actually assign this dimension is we're going to actually assign it a parametric function, okay? So from here, once I click on that dimension, I am going to go over, and I'm going to go over to label dimension over here, all right? Does everyone have that button here on their screen? Depending on how your horizontal ribbon layout, this is actually different than what I'm used to seeing, but this is what we should all have. Okay, I'm going to go down under label, and I'm going to click on this little button over here to the right that says create parameter. Okay, it looks like a really old little computer with a little sun on it, and if you hover your mouse over it, it says create parameter. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and we're going to get the parameter properties dialog box. Okay, and from here we can start to assign some of the different tools that we want to associate with this parameter. All right, so we're going to leave our parameter type as family parameter in everything that we do. Okay, we're not going to work with a shared parameter at this point. All right, and the next step is going to be to assign this parameter a name. So I'm going to call this tabletop width. Okay, and then over to the right, we have two different options. We have a type parameter and an instance parameter. So we talked a little bit about this last class. Can someone maybe give me a little refresher on the difference between the type parameter and the instance parameter? Does anybody remember that? Okay, it's a tricky one. I even get confused myself sometimes. But so we have two different types of parameters. We're going to go ahead and, for the tabletop width, we are going to work with the type option. What this does is, just like when we create a door and we want to create a new door size, our process is to duplicate that door and to go through. We now have our new type. Okay, so we've created a new type of door by duplicating it and giving it a name. And then we would go down and we would assign its width, we would assign its height, and all those different properties. Okay, that is an example of changing a type parameter. Okay, it is a parameter that is associated solely to the type of the object that you are creating. Okay, whereas an instance parameter is, let's say we have 6 3-foot by 7-foot doors in our project. And we know that if we want to change our width of that door, we need to change the type property of it, okay? And it will change all of them, okay? Whereas an instance parameter is a little bit different in that I can go and click on any of those 3-foot by 7-foot doors, and I could change the material or whatever parameters associated with it without changing all of the others. So it's a parameter that is associated purely with just the instance, that one particular instance, okay? So we're going to go ahead and leave type parameter checked with this, and then all of these are already locked in. We're not going to be able to change that. And then under group parameter option, we want to make sure that it stays as dimension. Okay, and what all of these are associated with is these gray little tabs that we see here under our different objects that we're working with. So by clicking on dimension, it's going to add, for our tabletop, once we load it into our project, it's going to add a little bar that says dimensions. Okay, and then everything that we add here, like tabletop width, tabletop height, will all start to categorize itself underneath that gray tab. Okay, so that's what that all means. We're going to leave that as type, and we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And so notice that what we have here now, it says tabletop width. We now have our first parameter, our first functional parameter associated with our project. Okay, we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to click on 4 feet, and we're going to add a new parameter. This is going to be tabletop height. No, not height. Tabletop. What do we just create? Width. Yeah. So we want to do length. Thank you. So we're going to do tabletop length. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and hit OK. All right. So we have a width and we have a length, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to add a height. Okay, so we're going to go over to our back elevation here. All right, let's move our levels out a little bit just so we have a little bit more room to work with. And notice that we can see all of our different reference planes that we've already created. Okay, and we also have a reference plane associated with our ground level. So I'm going to go up to create, and I'm going to create another reference plane that's going to be representational of our tabletop height. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. Okay. And notice that right here under click name, if you want to actually give that a name, you could say, you can do that. I don't necessarily need to. I know what it means. But if you want to be a little extra organized, you could say tabletop height.
You
Okay.
create a level or
A reference plane. Yep. So I went over and I went to create and I clicked on reference plane and I added that reference plane. And just like we did for the width and the length, I'm also going to go up to annotate and I'm going to go over to aligned and I'm going to add a dimension.
And how high is that have to be?
It doesn't matter. Okay, because the goal is that we're going to add a parameter that we can type in whatever number we want and it's going to adjust itself accordingly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add a dimension from our bottom up to our top. Okay, and it's going to say 6 feet 5 and whatever inches. That's okay. All right, but I'm going to go ahead and click on that dimension. All right, and I am going to go up to labels and I'm going to add another parameter. Okay, and I'm going to leave all of these as they currently are. I'm going to call this table top height. All right, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, so I'm going to leave this weird funky dimension as is for now, and we're going to go back over to our floor plan. Okay, so one of the important things as we go through this process of creating a parametric object is that we want to make sure that we test the functionality of this. We want to make sure that it's actually working before we go in and start to add our physical objects that we're going to eventually lock onto these reference planes. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the properties box up here in our upper horizontal ribbon. We're going to click on this button that says family types. Okay, we're going to click on family types and notice that right now we have 3 different parameters. Okay, we have a tabletop width, length, and height. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to test this by changing some of these. I'm going to make this width 6 feet, all right, and I'm going to hit apply. Okay, notice that our reference plane changed. Okay, notice that right here it is now changed to 6 feet. But does anyone notice something that maybe isn't quite correct? I'm purposely doing this wrong so that we understand this problem.
not centered.
Exactly. It's not centered. It is actually flexing. Okay, it's flexing in that it's making it bigger. Okay, if I go to my length, I can change this to 6 feet as well. Apply. But you're correct. It's not centered. Okay, so we want to fix that. We want to make sure that as this table flexes, that it actually flexes off the center axis. Okay, so I'm going to change this back to 4 feet, back to where we were. Okay, and we're going to fix this problem. Okay, so here we are back to where we were, and we're going to add a couple more different dimensions that are going to allow us to make this centered. So I'm going to go over to annotate, back over to aligned, all right, and I'm going to click on my outermost reference plane down here. I'm going to go 1, 2, down to the middle, and 3 on the outside. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the outside of that reference plane so that we have a dimension string from reference plane to reference plane to reference plane. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit escape, and I'm going to click on this dimension string here, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to click on this little button here that says equal. Okay, so it's going to change these dimensions from 2 feet to equal. These no longer have an actual dimensional value to them. All you're saying is that this reference plane and this reference plane, it doesn't matter what the dimension is, but they're always going to be equal to each other. Okay, so you're now when I adjust this tabletop length, these two will always flex, but it's going to always maintain this equal value to the center reference plane. Okay, so we're starting to establish some rules. Okay, we're starting to make this a little bit more rigid in the fact that the way that it flexes is actually more controlled by us. Okay, so I'm going to do that same process over here on the tabletop width. I'm going to go over to annotate, aligned, and I'm going to add that dimension string to that, and I'm going to click on the equal button. Okay, and I'm going to move this up so that.
How did you make them stick like that?
How did we make them what?
Stick the lines.
Okay, so I'll do that one more time. It's okay. So I'm going to go to annotate, aligned, and I'm going to click on the outermost reference plane, the inner, and then the outermost. Okay, so it's just a chain. 1, 2, 3. And then once I'm done with that, just click outside of our workspace, and we now have that chain. Okay, and then I'm going to go up here under the equal sign. I'm going to click on equal, and that will change those dimensions to equal. Okay, so now, again, we're going to test it. We're always going to test it after every little thing that we do to make sure that it all works. All right, I can change this to 6 feet. All right, hit apply. And notice that now our reference planes or our tabletop is 6 feet, but it actually is now equal to our center reference plane. Okay, so that's successful. We know that works. All right, I'm not going to change the other one. I'm just going to assume that it works the same way as the one that we just created. Okay, so I'll put that back, and let's do the same thing for our tabletop height. Okay, so I'm going to go back, and let's test this really quickly. All right, I'm going to go to family types. Let's change our tabletop height to, we'll say 3 feet, and hit apply. All right, and notice that our height changed. So that's good. We actually don't need to add any other parameter at this particular point because that works the way that we want it. We don't have a central axis that it's working off of. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and hit OK. We know that reference plane actually works. Okay, so right now we've successfully created the parametric functionality for the tabletop. We know that that's going to work. Okay. So before we move on, let's add one more reference plane for our tabletop. We're going to add the one that represents the bottom of our tabletop. Okay, so I'm going to go over to create, and I'm going to click on new work plane. Whoops, new reference plane, and I'm going to add it just below the reference plane that represents the top of our table. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. Okay, and I want this to be a fixed dimension. Okay, so right now this reference plane is 4 inches from the top. Okay, so I want this to be a fixed dimension. So regardless of what the width of our tabletop is, it's always going to be that 4 inches or 3 inches or whatever you want it to be. Let's make it 3 inches. I think that's a little bit more proportional. Okay, so what I'm going to do from here is I am going to again go over to annotate, go to aligned, and I'm going to add a dimension string from here to here, and then I'm going to lock it. Okay, what that means is instead of hitting equal, this is kind of similar, but we're going to instead lock it so that when I do adjust this tabletop height, that 3 inch dimension is always stationary. Okay, it's never going to change. Okay, let's go ahead and test it. Again, let's change our tabletop height. Maybe we go to 4 feet. And we hit OK. Notice that it goes up, but this reference plane also goes up with it, and it maintains that 3 inch dimension. Okay, so that still works. That's successful. All right, so we're now actually officially done with it with the tabletop. We know that all flexes properly. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add our reference planes for our legs. Okay, we're going to start to add the last piece to our parametric table. So we're going to go over to create, and we're going to create a new reference plane here, and I'm going to add it on the inner side of this table on all of our corners. Okay, so I'm just going to add a reference plane here. I'm going to say, again, this dimension's not super critical right now. We're going to end up locking it in, but whatever you choose on the first one, choose for all the others. So I'm going to say 3 inches. Okay, I'm going to add it here on the inside. Okay, I'm going to add one over here on this inside, and do the same process on all 4 of our outermost reference planes. Okay, everyone see that? So now we've created a little segment here, right here, that is going to be used later on for the width of our table legs. Okay, so from here, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to continue to add some parametric functionality to our table legs. So I'm going to go over to annotate. I'm going to click on aligned. Okay, and I am going to add that 3 inch dimension. Okay, like so, to all of our different leg corners. Like that. Okay, 3 inches. Okay, everyone see that step here? Okay, that looks good. All right, and then from here, let's see, let me just kind of refresh my memory here. No, I don't think so quite yet. I think this looks good. Actually, yes. Let's go ahead and lock those. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the 3-inch. I may end up coming back and changing that. Like I mentioned, it's a very step-by-step process, and if you kind of diverge it, and sometimes I have to kind of refresh my own memory on this step. So let's lock this real quick. Okay, I take that back. Let's actually not lock those. There actually comes a time when you're creating a parametric family when you can actually have too much function. You can't overlock things and over constrain the properties to where it's not going to be able to flex accordingly. Okay, so let's just test our what we have here real quick. Let's just see if this works. So table length, let's change this to 5 feet, width 5 feet, and apply. Okay, that actually worked. Okay, so that worked the way that I wanted to. So notice that we've added the 3-inch dimension, and notice that the spaces that we have set aside for our table legs have moved out with our tabletop width. Okay, so, and it's important that as you continue to do this, okay, that actually continues to work simultaneously with our with the flexing of our tabletop width, because when that tabletop gets wider, we want to make sure that our table legs move out with it as well. Okay, and so if you're creating a different object, let's just say you decide to create a different table for this exercise, you can start to think about how these different dimensions are associated with the other objects in the family. So if you decide to create something that looks a little different than this table, you might want to lock various other dimensions in depending on how you want it to function. Okay, so if you're trying to maintain a certain dimension from the outer edge, you'll need to create those different reference planes and lock those dimensions in place. Okay, what's interesting about parametric families is that every one is different. Not one really operates the same. So every time you create one, every one is like its own little puzzle. So there's not really one way that's going to solve every single parametric family. There's not one step-by-step process that works for everyone. So everything that you create is going to be its own process. And sometimes it will be a little frustrating. Okay, sometimes it takes a little trial and error to make sure that everything flexes the way that you want it to. Okay, but I promise you, it's all worth the time. And an example of where this is really useful, unfortunately, you'll probably never have to create a parametric table unless you're creating like a custom piece of furniture that literally does not exist. But for the most part, we can go out and find a lot of these families already created. Okay, but in my example that I like to use is in my workplace. Okay, actually last year we had an example where we had a custom awning that we wanted to create for this project. Okay, and this awning was not something that I can just go out to an awning manufacturer and download an already created family. But I knew that we were going to run into a problem where we would have a bunch of various different awning lengths and widths and different pitches and whatnot in this project. But what I didn't want to do was create just an awning like we created last class and have to create a new instance of it every time one little dimension changed. So I needed to create a parametric family for this awning that I could adjust the width and I can adjust all the different properties. So even though it took me a few hours to create this family, and it took a little trial and error, so I had to go through until I finally got it to work the way that I wanted to, I now have this really cool louvered awning that I can bring into any project. Now, up to this day, I use it all the time, and it's ready to go. I'm never gonna have to go in and create another awning because it's already parametric, and I can go in and punch in whatever dimensions I want, and it's gonna fit whatever space that I want. Okay, so even though it takes a little time, initially, it's worth it if you know you're gonna reuse that object in the future. Okay, so now we have all of our different parametric functions minus the materials. We're gonna do the materials last. Okay, so we know that everything flexes and everything works. Okay, now let's just, I don't know if I actually added parametric function to the actual table legs last time. Let me just go ahead and try it though. This may have actually been a fixed dimension. I know I said we were going to create a parametric table leg. I'm going to select all of those dimensions and let's just see if this actually works here. So create parameter. I'm going to call this table leg width. All right, and I think that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Reference planes over constrained. Yeah, that's what I thought was actually going to happen. I think I actually made this a fixed dimension last time. I may come back to this because this is kind of one of those things where I wish I actually want to make sure that it'd be kind of nice to know how to do that. And I may have actually done it in the last video that I created. But let's continue for now, so just so we don't get bogged down in that effort. Okay. So now that we have all of our reference planes working the way that we want them, we can start to add our physical objects that will start to be locked to these reference planes that make it parametric. Okay. So now that this all works, we're going to go over to create, all right, and we're going to click on extrusion, all right, and this extrusion that we're going to create is going to be our tabletop, all right. And to start, there's actually two ways that we can do this. I'm going to first do it by just creating an arbitrary rectangle here in the middle of our reference planes, okay. Doesn't matter what the width and the length are, okay. We're going to end up changing that here in a second, okay. And as soon as we have that, we can go ahead and hit the check mark. All right, if we look at this in 3D, where did my 3D go? There it is. Look at this in 3D here. We can see that we have a three-dimensional object now in our family. All right, and then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that object here, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to click on the align button. Okay, I'm going to click on align. And I'm going to first click on the outer reference plane that I want my shape to align with. Okay, it's just like when we were doing our residence project and we wanted something to align with another face. You would always click on the face that you want it to align with first, and then you would click on the object that you want to move to that face. Okay, so I'm going to click on the reference plane, the outermost reference plane here, and then I'm going to click on the right face of our tabletop, and notice that it moves over to lock in with that reference plane, and I'm going to go ahead and lock that in place. Okay, I'm going to do that same process with all of our edges. So I'm going to click on the reference plane, then click on the edge of our object, and then lock it. So reference plane, object, lock. Reference plane, object, lock. Okay, and then now if we go over and we test this, all right, so maybe we want this to be 4 feet, 4 feet, and I hit apply. Okay, notice that that tabletop adjusted with it, okay, and we can hit OK. If we want to look at this in 3D, we can do that. Make sure it's a little bit easier. So there's our tabletop. Again, we can test it here. Let's make it something crazy so that we can definitely notice it. 8 feet, 8 feet, hit apply. Okay, our tabletop adjusts. Okay, so that works. We're happy with that. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. So let's look at another way that we can actually create this. Either way is totally fine and up to you. I use both ways myself. I don't really have a method that is necessarily better, but another way that we can create that tabletop is we can go over to create, extrusion, and instead of just adding it here to the middle, I'm going to go over and I'm actually going to select the outermost edge from one side. Oops, let's grab our rectangle. So I'm going to start here at the outermost edge of our tabletop, and I'm going to go over to the other side, okay? And I'm going to click there. And notice that after we do that,
you didn't lock to the corner there.
Which one did I not lock? Oh, this one over here. You're right. That's why I'm actually not seeing a lock button over here, because it's actually not associated with the reference plane. Good catch. So let's start right there, make sure that it's in the right spot, and we'll go over and we'll click it over in this corner. And notice now that we have 4 locks on each side of our tabletop. So from here, I can click on the lock on all 4 edges, and I'm going to hit the check mark. And it'll now work exactly the same. So you could argue that that's one less step, okay? But sometimes I like to actually see them locking to the edges, so up to you. But again, we can test it. 4 feet, 4 feet, and we'll hit OK. Great, it all works. So now let's make sure that our tabletop height works. So I'm gonna go back to the back elevation here, and again, I'm gonna use my align tool. So I'm gonna go over to, actually, let's click on the shape first. Let's click on align. Yep, go ahead.
That's the bottom of our table.
So that when it flexes, when it goes up and down, that we maintain that 3-inch.
So the thickness or
That's the thickness of the table.
That's the thickness. Now you could also add if you wanted that to be parametric, you could do that the exact same way as we're doing the width and the length. Okay, you could add a dimension to that and add a parametric functionality to that tabletop width. Okay, so from here, I am going to click on the uppermost reference plane, okay, because I want the tabletop to lock to that. And I'm going to click on the top of the shape. Okay, I'm going to lock that into place, and I'm going to do the same thing for our bottom. So I'm going to click on the bottom reference plane, and then click on the bottom of our shape, and lock that in. Okay, so now
will give me the thickness of
it will always be 3 inches. Yes. Okay, so now if I test it, tabletop height, let's make this 2'6". Hit OK.
The tables are height locked or not?
Yes. And I hit apply, that moves down. Okay? We all see that? We're going to go ahead and hit OK.
What if it doesn't want to go up or down?
Click on that. Yep. Click on align. Well, no, you haven't locked your shape in with your reference planes yet. So you'll need to do what I just did. Okay, so let's go back and let's do that one more time. Okay, so everyone has something that looks like this. We're going to go to our align button. Click on the top reference plane. Then click on the top of our shape. Lock it in place. Click on the bottom of our reference plane. And then click on the bottom of our tabletop. And we're going to lock it into place. And now if I go and test that parameter, we know that it will go up and down, and it'll maintain that 3-inch dimension. Okay, so that is good. All right, so we now have a completely parametric tabletop. Okay, and if this is really easy for you, I'd maybe challenge yourself a little bit and maybe add a glass insert in the middle. Okay, and try to allow that to flex with it. Okay, so that's a nice extra challenge. Okay, and you can start to lock in those different dimensions so that the glass also flexes with the tabletop. So that's an extra challenge for someone that maybe finishes this in like 10 minutes or something like that. All right. So now lastly, before we finish, let's add our tabletop legs. So we're going to go back to our reference level, and we're going to do the same process: create, extrusion, and go to our rectangle, and we'll go ahead and do that. All right. You'll notice that when we do it this time, that our locks are actually kind of all scattered over the place. That's okay. All right. They're just they're still the same reference planes. So we can go ahead and lock all of those in place. Okay. All we're saying is that we want the outer edge of that table leg to be locked in with those reference planes. So if those reference planes moves, the table legs move with it. Okay. They're going to be associated with those reference planes all the time. Okay. So I'll do that same process. Whoops. On all the legs. We'll lock them all into place. 1, 2, 3, and where's the fourth one? Oh, there it is, 4. All right, check. All right, we'll do the same process. Sorry, don't hit check yet. You want to go through and do all these at the same time. Okay, so we'll do that. Check, 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 and check. That looks good. Let's add our last one. Check, 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 and where's our final lock? Oh, right there. Check. All right, so we have 4 locks for every single shape. We'll go ahead and hit the check mark. Okay, and if we look at this in plan, that all looks correct. We want to look at this in our elevation. Okay, and notice that this isn't quite right yet. So what would we think is the process now to make sure that these table legs flex with our tabletop?
Use the align tool.
Yeah, we're going to use the align tool, and we're going to click on what now?
the top first.
Which one? This one?
No, the bottom.
The bottom one, correct, because we want it to actually be locked in with the bottom of our tabletop. Correct, that's good. So we're going to click on the bottom reference plane, and then we will click on the top of our legs. Okay? And we will lock that in place because we want that to always be an association. All right, and that's it. We now have a parametric table. It's a very, very basic table, but for the most part, it's parametric and it has some parametric functionality. All right, so if we look at this in 3D, let's just test it one last time. Okay, there's our table. All right, if we click on the different functions, we can adjust the height. We'll say 2'6". Great, that works. We want this to be a 6-foot table. Great, that works. Okay, so that's a successful little parametric family. Very simple, but successful. All right, and we're gonna go ahead and hit OK. Now the last thing that we're gonna learn is we're gonna learn how to add a material, a parametric material. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, or a couple ways that we could do this is you could just click on the actual shape or the actual object, and just like when we were working in the residence and we were doing generic models, you could just go over here and you can assign it a material. Okay, but by doing that way, it's not going to be parametric. So if you load it into your project and you want to change the materials, you'll actually have to double click on that object, open it in the family editor, and change the material that way. Well, we don't want to do that. We want it to be simple in the fact that we can just change it in the project. All right, so instead of selecting the material here, in order to add that parametric functionality, we're going to add the parameter a little bit differently. We're not going to do it the way we previously did it, but right here under materials and finishes, we're going to click on this little button you see right here. We're going to click on that, all right, and then down here at the very bottom of this associate family parameter, we're going to click on new parameter. Looks like a little piece of paper, a little sun. We're going to click on that, and we're going to get the same little parameters properties box that we got last time. All right, and it's going to work the same way. We're going to add this, we're going to call this tabletop finish. All right, but this time you can make it a type parameter if you want, but this time we're going to do it a little bit differently, and I'm going to make it an instance parameter. So if we have 3 4-foot by 4-foot tables in our project, I can go through and I can change the materials for all of them without creating a completely new type. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on instance, and our group parameters, materials, and finish. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to hit OK again. All right, we're going to do the same thing for our legs. We're going to go over and click on a new parameter. All right, we're going to call this table leg finish. Click on instance. We want this to be a different type of parameter. We're going to hit OK. All right, and there we have our finished product. All right. So from here, if you want to test it, you can bring it into a project. So let me just open up one of our projects. I'm going to open up a project. Let's go to, let's see, week 10. I actually haven't created a folder in a while. Let's open up our residence project, and we'll use that as our test. Okay, so we'll go to the residence, we'll go to our finished project, and we'll put it in our living room. We'll hit open. All right, here's our finished residence. Let's turn on our section box. Let's cut this building in half. All right, some path. Let's see, where's my section box? Right there, section box. Turn that on. Let's, whoops, didn't grab the edge like I thought I did. Come on now. There we go. Okay, so there's the inside of our living room. Okay, I'm gonna go back over to, again, I'm just doing Control Tab. Control Tab will cycle through all of your views. Okay, so as soon as we're done with this, you probably wanna save it. So save as family so that you can always have this next time. All right, I think we're on week 12 actually now, so let's create a folder for week 12. All right, and let's call this Parametric Black Table. That's our IKEA table. Or you can call it IKEA table or whatever you want. Go ahead and hit save. So now we've saved our family. All right, I'm gonna go to load into project, and it's gonna load it into our other project. And because it's a floor-based family, it's automatically going to lock itself onto a floor. All right, if I go up here, all right, notice this blue line right here saying it's associating itself with that floor. All right, and we'll go ahead and place it. All right, and then from here, notice that I can go to edit type, and if I want to create a new tabletop, I'm going to do, or a new type of table, I'm going to do duplicate, and I'm going to say 3-foot length by 3-foot width, okay, by 2-foot 6-inch height, okay, and I'm going to hit OK. and I can change all of those different properties. So 3 foot length, 3 foot height, and our height is good. Hit OK, and there we go. There's our tabletop. And from here, if I click on that, notice that under materials and finishes, we have table length finish and tabletop finish. I can go through and I can start to add, you know, all whatever finishes or materials I want. Any wood, any material you can think of. If you want your table to be made out of brick, you can do it. Okay? All right, so that's going to be it. All right, that's all you need to do for this project. To finish it, as soon as you're done, just create like a little rendering or a little 3D view of your table. Okay, and that will be what you need to turn in for this exercise. Okay, so it's 10:30 or it's 10:22 right now. Let's work on this for about an hour or so. All right, and like I mentioned earlier, if this is easy for you, and it may be very easy, challenge yourself by adding a couple other little parametric functions. Okay, maybe try adding a glass insert to your table. Okay, and start to add a little bit of difficulty.